And then the Quebec emerald was kind of one of the more exciting finds that we found. A friend of mine, June Tvikram, and I found this species in amongst a bunch of Kennedy's emeralds. And at that time, the closest locations for it were up by Quebec in the eastern part of Canada and over in British Columbia in the western part of Canada and a few spots in Maine. And since we figured out what habitat it requires, if we find that right kind of habitat and go to it, we tend to find it. It's just quite exciting. That has led to some kind of fun research using helicopters and such. If you're going to look for dragonflies, you're going to look for different habitats. Just like with birds, if you want to find certain species of bird, you're going to go to a certain habitat. And know that this is a concept that you folks are going to understand quite well. And for dragonflies, you can really break it down into rivers, lakes and ponds, and bogs. Rivers tend to be populated quite a lot by the clubtail family. They're kind of considered the trout of the dragonfly world. They really do require high water quality, cool, well-oxygenated waters, no siltation, no muddy flows, that kind of stuff. If you're going to lakes and ponds, you're going to find a lot of the skimmers. The skimmers are some of our more common dragonflies, stuff you'd even see at a golf course or something like that. They tend to like these rich, eutrophic, mucky-bottomed habitats that you'd find in lakes and ponds. And then there are bog species. Some of them are breeding right down in the sphagnum itself. Some of them are depending on the ponds and the pools that are in bogs that are a bit more acidic. Fens fit into this as well in a little bit different way. So now we're gonna go through some identification help. And I'm actually moving through this pretty quickly. I'm not sure why I'm going so fast. But just using the chat bar, let's get some participation here. How do you know which is which, a wolf versus a moose? What characteristics about the animal? Let's just get some stuff in the chat box going. How do you know it's a wolf versus a moose? This is a participation sort of event. All right, so we've got one of these two animals has antlers. The male does, the female doesn't, but that's all right. We got that distinction. If it has antlers, it's going to be a moose. Horns, size, hooves, size. Yeah, the feet are a big giveaway. The teeth would be a big giveaway. The legs would be a big giveaway. Yeah, thanks for all that. And so it's the same with birds. It's the same with dragonflies. Once you start looking closely at them, you start seeing some differences that can help you figure out what group they're in, and that can aid in identification. The darners have these balloon-like eyes. They're just big, round, bulbous eyes that come in contact along a long margin along the top of the head. You can see there's a line there where the arrow's pointing, where the lenses come together. We have some darner species that have as many as 60,000 lenses on their heads. So 30,000 lenses per eye. You and I have one lens per eye, if we're lucky and we still have both our eyes. Darners, there's some darner species that have 60,000 lenses between their two eyes. The next family we're going to look at is a spiketail family. Again, using the eyes, they meet at this sort of intersection. They meet at a point. almost like an infinity symbol wrapping around um, over and over again, coming to a point right here. There's just a tiny little bit of a space, but you can see that it's coming to a point. And that's our spike tails. Another way to know spike tails, if females have a spike tail, they have an ovipositor that sticks out way out beyond the end of their abdomen. And that's where their name comes from. Club tails tend to have clubs on their abdomen. Their abdomens tend to be clubbed, but not all club tails are clubbed, and not all clubbed dragonflies are club tails. But if the eyes are, if it's a dragonfly, if you're sure it's a dragonfly, and the wings are the same size and same shape, and it's got a robust abdomen and all that other stuff is going on, but the eyes are separated, then you know that that is a club tail, one of the club tail species. And these are the only 6 families we have in Minnesota. So it's a pretty straightforward deal. The cruiser family, the bottom left, they have 1 stripe on the thorax. Other dragonflies that have stripes on the thorax will have 2 or more stripes. Here you can see there's 2 yellow spots with stripes on the emerald, but on the cruiser there's 1 big, broad, kind of cream colored stripe. And there's only 2 species in this group, so that's a pretty easy group to get your head around. Emeralds used to be in the skimmer family, but they've been moved. One of the main things about the emeralds is they have, a lot of them have these emerald green eyes. They just look like they're lit from within. In the sunlight, they're just jaw-droppingly gorgeous eyes on these things. And then they have this ring. This is between the 2nd and the 3rd abdominal segment. There's a yellow ring. Sometimes this ring is bulbous, and sometimes it's just very thin and slender, like this one. But they have a ring around their abdomen, which tells you that they are an emerald, because no other family members of dragonflies have got that ring around the abdomen like that. And then the skimmer family is kind of the bag that everything else goes into. They're a widely diverse group of dragonflies. Most of our dragonflies with markings on their wings, not all, most of them that have markings on their wings are going to be in the skimmer family. They tend to have very robust abdomens, and tend to be more of a lake kind of species. All right, so with that in mind, which family have we got here? Anybody brave enough to type in something in the chat? I'll back up. There's the 6 families. This one has a characteristic about it. That is right. That is a club tail. Good job, Jeff. It's got space between the eyes, and everything else about it says dragonfly. Which family on this one? I'll go back 2 slides. Take a quick look at that. Which family is that one in? Anyone? Yes, we've got a darner there. Very good. What's the darner family? This one's actually a common green darner, the one we're seeing right now with that characteristic bullseye on its face. They're definitely going to town this time of year. So then action, what can you do? There's the Minnesota Dragonfly Society, which has events around the state. Unfortunately, most of them are near the metro. Saxon Bog has been getting into dragonflies quite a bit, which I've been appreciative of. That's been very exciting. They've got a great resource there. And then there's something called Odonata Central, which is a clearinghouse of data for dragonflies and damselflies. And then, of course, iNaturalist. I'm assuming some of you are familiar with iNaturalist, and that's a good place too. And I want right now to solicit questions from anybody who's got questions. And I suppose you could do it verbally, or we could do it in the chat bar. While that's going on, I'll talk a little bit about the darners that we're seeing right now. We're seeing a lot of darners flying up and down the shore. Most of them are common green darners, and most of them are pretty young. They've just emerged, and they're making their flights south soon. I don't think they are heading south yet. I think the flights we're seeing right now are mostly feeding swarms, just sort of gathering swarms while they're preparing. It takes some cold temperatures, cold weather to induce them to make that flight south. And the individuals that emerge from around this area will end up along the Gulf Coast. So they make that in one generation. They make it all the way down to the Gulf Coast, where they then lay their eggs. They have a very short larval lifespan of about 3 months. That gets us into springtime. And the first dragonflies we see in the spring every year up here are the common green darners that are migrating back north. So that's the offspring of the ones that went south are flying north. That's kind of the migration talk. Well, okay, so to continue the migration talk, there's it was thought for a while that all green darners migrated, but then I would find in June newly emerged dragonflies, newly emerged common green darners that couldn't have migrated up because they were too young, and other people noticed the same thing. And now we know that there are they're not two distinct populations, but there's two distinct strategies for overwintering. And one strategy for overwintering is to leave, to go away, fly south, take that big risk, take that big adventure, head down to Mississippi or Alabama or Louisiana or Texas, lay your eggs, even down into Mexico. Another strategy that they've got is to just hunker down over the winter as mature larvae, ready to emerge in the spring. And it's an interesting strategy that they have the two strategies for doing this incredibly complex thing. To get to some questions here, how many different species of dragonflies are there out there? Worldwide, there's about 5,000. North America is considered to have about 350. This includes dragonflies and damselflies as well. In Minnesota, we have gotten up to 150 different species. So they're a lot more diverse than most people think. When I got started in this, I figured there'd be a few dozen species and that'd be it. But they're widely diverse, and Minnesota's a really great spot to see them. We have exactly 150 different species here in Minnesota. St. Louis County has the record for the number of species per county. St. Louis County, of course, is overly big, but it stretches across a lot of habitat. I think they've got like 102 different species, something like that. But Lake County, where I live, has got about 100 species. So we're trying to keep up with you guys down there. Do they fly without stopping, or do they make stops like birds do? They make stops on their migration. They feed along the way. What their whole intention is to stay right ahead of that cold weather. It takes a couple of nights of near freezing temperatures for them to figure out that it's time to go, and then they start heading down. And they'll head down in numbers heavy enough that they'll show up on radar, like Air Force radar, that kind of thing, along the Mississippi River, down around St. Louis. They sort of pile up down there. Millions and millions of dragonflies in the air at one time. But they do stop along the way, and they do feed as well. All right, I'm reading the next question. A month ago in a small park in Duluth by lake, for a long time, I saw many large dragonflies going in many directions like a migration wave in one direction. Never ever landed. Were they eating some insects I couldn't see, or another explanation? There are some species that will do something called dispersal. If their populations get a little heavy, get a little high in one area, they tend to disperse and just sort of take off as a big swarm. I'm not sure how else to explain that one. They also might have been eating insects. It could have been a feeding swarm as well. But if they were going all in the same direction, going in many directions, unlike the migration rate. Got it. So they were hawking. They were eating insects, um, taking advantage of maybe a little wind shadow behind a clump of trees, where the small insects were able to fly in the heavy wind. How many miles do they fly per day? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. It's quite a few, and they're again followed by the kestrels. I liken the kestrel strategy of following the green darners is, if I was driving down Interstate 35 and I was feeling a little hungry, I could just roll down my window and grab a cheeseburger and start eating it as I kept driving. That's kind of what the kestrels do with green darners. Other questions? Will stronger winds blow them off course? Yes, that can happen. They tend to just generally go south. Green darner is a species that lives from coast to coast, from the Atlantic coast to the Pacific coast. And so getting blown a little bit east or a little bit west isn't a problem for them. They'll find the habitat they need and make it go. If anyone here remembers the big blowdown event of 1999, that following that big event where the Boundary Waters was devastated and trees were down and well, there was a lot of damage and a lot of rain, I started seeing dragonfly species around here that I hadn't seen before. And some of them are still here. The calico pennant is one species that I think we were beyond the northern edge of its range, and that storm brought them, that big derecho wind brought them in, and they've stayed ever since, at least according to my observations. Boy, you would think they'd be affected by the smoke. Everyone else is affected by the smoke, and you would think they would be affected by the smoke as well. We had, I live up here in Finland, Minnesota, and there was one day a couple weeks ago where I could stand out in my driveway and catch ash flakes like they were snowflakes from that Greenwood Lake fire. And the smoke was just eye stinging. And, you know, it's got to affect other animals other than ourselves as well. I'm sure of it. How are they affected by climate change? They are conceivably, and we're getting some evidence to this, starting to move their ranges north. And we're also getting some western species that are moving farther east. Climate change doesn't just mean north and south, it means east and west, every direction. And so we're seeing something like the blue-eyed darner, which I've expected to find in the western part of the state for all these years. I've never been able to find it out there, but I find them in the Twin Cities regularly. They're flying through the eastern part of the state, and they're getting into Wisconsin as well, and they really should be just a western species. Are there any endangered or threatened? We have a list of species of special concern. There's one species called the spatterdock darner that was found in Washington County, north of the Twin Cities. It was found in a couple of ponds, a couple of fishless ponds, and we could find them there every year. And then one year, minnows showed up in the pond, and the dragonflies have not been back since. And so there's some threats such as that. A fishless pond is a great spot to stock minnows into if you're in the minnow industry, because then you can trap them out and sell them as bait. And I've been in some habitats in the south central, southwestern part of the state that have been, to put it non-scientifically, pretty gross, pretty agriculturally and developmentally impaired streams, and yet there's still life in them. But I wonder often what was there before all the farm runoff and the manure waste and all that kind of stuff went on. I'm not anti-farming. I'm just speaking about dragonflies and their habitat. Other questions? What can people do to encourage dragonfly habitat continuation? So I used to, back when I was doing a lot more dragonfly work before I got this job at Tedagoosh, I would get emails from people around the country wondering where they could buy dragonfly nymphs to dump in their lake, so that they would have more dragonflies, so they would have fewer mosquitoes. And it just makes me cringe. There's just all sorts of things wrong with that. You're transporting aquatic species around and planting them where they maybe shouldn't be and that kind of stuff. So my advice to people always was, especially if you have lakeshore property, there's a lot that lake owners can do to help encourage dragonfly habitat, good dragonfly habitat. And that would be not to clear all the vegetation out from around your dock. I know you want a swimming area, but that's a forest. It's an underwater forest, and it's habitat for these important species. Keeping a buffer along your yard and lake shoreline is really quite important. And then consider what for everyone, not even just lake shores, because all of our stormwater runoff goes somewhere, is to just think about what we do with our lawns. Are we fertilizing our lawns heavily? Are we using pesticides and herbicides in our lawns? These are all things. They don't seem directly connected to dragonflies, but these are all very important ways to keep dragonfly populations healthy. I have a question: do their populations fluctuate? And yes, they do. There are some years where there's a lot of one species, and some years where there's not very many. This year I saw June was definitely less dragonfly filled than typical. And I think what happened is, if you remember back in late May, we had 2 nights in a row. I know up here in Finland, we hit 19.5 degrees for 2 nights in a row, right after a bunch of dragonflies had emerged. And the whole group of basket tails that are out and about in June were just pretty much gone this year. And that's definitely a weather effect. Will they come back next year? I'm assuming so. I mean, an end of May freeze is not a once in a millennium sort of thing. These things happen. They're probably going to be happening more often with extreme weather populations with global climate change. But we'll see next year if we have them back again. Yeah, some of their names are amazing. I had a fun experience where I had a man named Dennis Paulson, who was known to the birding world as well. He was in my van, and we were in Iowa during a symposium conference, and everyone in the van, my van, I had a van full of people, and everyone in my van was naming their favorite common names. And I said mine at the time, my favorite common name was the ebony bog hunter. And Dennis Paulson was sitting right behind me, and he says, "Yes, I'm particularly proud of that one." So the names are pretty recent addition to the whole lexicon. We didn't have common names. We had scientific names, and some people realized that it was important to get some common names out there, because beginners have a harder time with Latin names than they do with common names. It's kind of fun when I get in a group of a bunch of mostly old men. I can't use common names because they don't understand them, and then I get together with a bunch of young enthusiasts, and I can't use the Latin names because they all know the common names. That's a good brain exercise. Other questions? I've seen articles suggesting that mosquitoes can be genetically modified to dislike feeding off of us. Do you think that would affect dragonflies? Mosquitoes are important. I hate to be the bearer of bad news. Mosquitoes are pretty important. We're lucky to live in a part of the world where mosquitoes aren't all out to kill us with diseases. There are some diseases and some maladies that mosquitoes can transmit to us, but we're definitely not the tropics. And so if we could get mosquitoes that wouldn't like feeding off of humans, but fed off of everything else, I think that wouldn't hurt dragonflies at all. It would just be a bummer for all those other animals that had to deal with getting bit by mosquitoes. Hadn't heard that. That's interesting. So on the dragonfly migration, this is just kind of a topical thing. I'd be looking, just keep an eye on the weather. And as soon as we hit the first couple of nights, like 2 nights in a row of mid to upper 40s in temperature, start watching those swarms. So instead of being a feeding swarm where they're just feeding on smaller insects or something like that, they're actually all moving in one direction. Realized I could stop the share a while ago. They're all flying in one direction, and Hawk Ridge is a good spot to watch that from. And it usually coincides with the migration of the American kestrel. Anyone else? More and more lakeshore owners are hiring services to fog their yards from mosquitoes. How does this practice affect dragonfly populations? That practice, from my observation, affects all insects negatively. I know a couple who I tried talking out of doing it for a large party that we're going to have, and the mosquitoes were pretty bad, but they did it anyways. And a week or two later, she got back to me and said she regretted doing it because ever since then they hadn't seen a bumblebee or a butterfly or grasshopper or anything in their yard. I have no idea what they're spraying. I have no idea how long it hangs around, but I've seen nothing but bad stuff come out of that practice.
Does anybody else have any further questions? We rarely ask so many questions using the chat function, so thank you for encouraging us to do that and
good.
And gaining some new skills. So
we can do verbal questions too if anyone.
Yes.
If anyone's more inclined to do that, that's fine too.
Well, that's a good question.
Do people eat dragonflies? In other parts of the world, they do. Here in this part of the world, we have taught ourselves that insects are taboo. We don't eat insects. Insects are pests. Insects are gross. We don't eat insects. Yet we willingly eat shrimp like it's going out of style. It's just kind of a marine bug. But I've seen pictures, especially in Chinese markets, of dragonflies skewered from one end to the other, all lined up. on a skewer and then grilled, and people eat them crispy like that. I'd try it. I probably wouldn't eat the wings. I've watched kestrels rip the wings off before they eat them, and I'll learn from the kestrels not to eat the wings, but I'd eat the body. Why not the wings? Because they're crispy and keratin and no nutritional value, and I think they'd have a gross texture in my mouth. But the birds don't eat them either, so let's learn from them. I've watched waxwings just hop down the shoreline and just pick off newly emerged dragonflies one at a time, and they grab them and they hold them in a certain way in their bill, and then they whack them back and forth until the wings are gone, and then they gulp them down. So if cedar waxwings won't eat the wings, I'm not going to eat the wings. Insect populations are declining worldwide. How are dragonflies doing? I think they're following the same trends. I think they're part of the same trend line, that the numbers of individuals are going down. I don't have any evidence to support that, but that's been my observation. We've enjoyed watching great crested flycatchers catch dragonflies this summer. I don't hold that against the great crested flycatchers. Dragonflies are an important food source for lots of animals, and you can't have purple martins without dragonflies. And I got asked to speak at a purple martin festival once, and they were very apologetic about asking me about it because dragonflies are what they eat. And I was like, they're important for that reason as well. So I'm all for it. I've seen robins eating them. I've seen robins catch them right out of the air. I don't think anyone gives robins enough credit for being a cool bird. I'm glad you've had that opportunity to watch them. This is such an odd format, having to do it this way, but I do realize the reach is greater than being in person, and it's safer. And thanks for having me.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being with us. Thank you for your expertise, but especially for the work that you do, not only in informing us about dragonflies, but at the state park as well. It's important work, and we're grateful for it. Let's see, any other closing things we need to take care of? I would say, yeah, Greg is asking a question here. Let's see. Oh, yeah. Well, Kurt, do you have any other resource books to recommend? Look at that.
Dennis Paulson's Dragonflies of the East and Dragonflies of the West are both good books. There's they include the damselflies as well. I don't know how available it is. There's a Wisconsin, sort of a homemade Wisconsin field guide that was kind of my first field guide, and that's kind of what I broke my teeth on, was that field guide. Yeah, those are kind of the main resources.
Since Greg came late, can you hold up your book again? There you go.
There it is.
Thank you.
Dragonflies.
Thank you, Kurt.
Yep. Thanks for asking. It's been a fun road. It's opened a lot of doors.
Very good. Well, thanks again. For those who are interested